On the few times I've gone out in my van, one of the problems I've discovered is that I don't have any storage space. I end up just throwing my bags, my backpack, all my stuff on the floor of the van, and it scoots around when I'm driving. What I really need is a little storage area. Now, if you have your bed running north to south like I do in my van, you'll notice that there's this nice little gap between where the end of the bed is and the back of the driver's seat. So right here is where I want to put my little storage cabinet. I have an overnight camp planned this weekend, so I really need to put this together in a single day using what wood and utensils I have laying around the shop. Now, one thing I absolutely did not want to do is block my view of my rear windows from the rear view mirror. So what I'm doing here is stretching my blackout curtain over right to the edge so I can see just how far out the curtain can be without it blocking my view. Next, what I did was took a tape measure and measured that, and that basically gave me the depth of the cabinet. The dimensions I came up with were 24 inches wide, 24 inches deep, and 48 inches tall. By the way, if you plan on building a cabinet like this, do not use those dimensions. They turned out to be absolutely wrong. The cabinet is too deep for the space, but we'll get to that eventually. One of the smart things I did when I built this workbench was to build it on casters with brakes. The brakes allow everything to lock in place when I'm using the workbench, but when I have to do a lot of sawing and I don't want to get sawdust everywhere like I'm going to today, I can just unlock the wheels and roll it right out into the driveway. This miter saw generates a lot of sawdust, and so even though this isn't the intended use of the Ryobi leaf blower, I often use it to clean off my workbench before starting a project. Because I was being lazy and didn't want to go to Home Depot, I ended up using the plywood that I originally cut to put on the floor of my van. Now, what I found out the weekend after this is that having a floor on your van is pretty important, so I will be redoing that project, and really what I did was just kick the work down the road a little bit. Now, as I prepare to start cutting, I want to point out two things. Number one is eye and ear protection. I use these 3M WorkTunes ear muffs. They're Bluetooth, so I can listen to podcasts or music while I'm working, and I always try to wear a pair of goggles when I'm cutting things. The other thing are these quick clamps. I use them all the time. They are great for holding wood in place when you're cutting 2x4s, anything like that. They are like having a third, fourth, fifth, sixth set of hands while you're working on a project. To cut long straight cuts, I use this guide that I made out of 2 spare pieces of trim. I clamp it into place and use it to guide my handsaw. I'll show you how that works in just a minute. I'll show you how that could go wrong. So here's where paying attention in math class finally paid off. I want the outside dimensions of this thing to be 24 inches by 24 inches, but the back piece, since it's going to sit inside the other 2 pieces, can only be 23.5 inches wide. So lots of measuring. Like they say, measure twice, cut once, or as I do, measure 5 times and then cut twice and then go buy more wood. Once you're sure all your measurements are correct, all I do is clamp this little guide in place and saw away. Now, I have 2 different hand saws. I have a corded saw and my Ryobi cordless saw. I started off with the corded one because it has a little bit more power, but because I'm working out on the driveway, the cordless one is actually much more convenient, and so I switched to that one pretty quickly. Now, before I got too far in this project, I wanted to make sure that my 2-foot by 4-foot dimensions were correct. So I put the piece of plywood in my van, and as you can see, it doesn't fit very well. It won't push flush up against the outside wall because of this ridge up here at the top. So I did some loose measuring and figured if I cut a 2-inch by 2-inch diagonal cut off the top of the wood, it should slide right in or close enough for my needs. This little diagonal cut was probably the easiest cut of the entire project. With the first piece cut, all I did was lay it down onto the other piece of plywood, trace the shape, clamp the guide into place, and start sawing. Now, if you pay close attention, you'll see I've put the guide in the wrong direction. And so when I'm looking down as to why is this sawing so hard, it's because I'm literally sawing my guide in half. The way the track guide works is that it's the exact width of the saw, so the runner of the saw rides on that and guides the blade straight. So if you put it the wrong way, like I did, you'll saw right through the middle of it. I want you to look at this stupid look on my face as I sit there trying to figure out why half the guide just fell off onto the ground. I look completely confused. Then I figure it out. One of the things about making YouTube videos is you really want people to see how much time you spent on a project. So there's literally half an hour of me sawing wood into tinier and tinier pieces, which to be honest is not that interesting to watch, so we'll just skip ahead here. Now, if I were any kind of carpenter at all, I would probably just build this out of plywood, but I really wanted to make the shelves sturdy. So what I did was I made shelf supports out of 2x2s. These are leftover 2x2s from my bed project. I used the miter saw to chop them down, and this is where the math really gets weird, because not only are you subtracting the 1/2 inch for the plywood on either side, but then you have to start subtracting the 1.5 inches, which is the true width of a 2-inch piece of wood. So it gets a little complicated, but it's simple subtraction. It's not rocket science. Just like with the plywood, the easiest thing is to get one the right size and then use that as a template to cut all your other ones. Once all the major pieces of wood were cut, it was time to start assembling. Now this is where I got a bucket and another piece of wood and a lot of other things to try to prop all these things in the right position so I could quickly drive some screws into the back and hold it together. As you can see, I used those 2x2s and all those clamps to hold things together while I started putting glue and screws everywhere they would go. With the frame of the cabinet assembled, it was time to start cutting the shelves. Now, with the dimensions I'm using, the shelves needed to be 23.5 inches wide by 24 inches deep. The problem was I didn't have any plywood left that was big enough to cut those out of one piece, so I had to divide them into two. So each shelf is 23.5 inches wide by 12 inches deep, and then I could stack two of them one in front of the other to make a complete shelf. So I didn't do a good job of filming this part, but what I'm doing here is test fitting the shelves to make sure they fit in the bottom of the cabinet. And then what I did was put my laptop bag with my laptop in it on that shelf and measured the height of the next shelf. And then I used some plastic tubs that I'm going to store in that shelf, and that is how I determine the height of my shelf. So each shelf is very specific to the things that I plan to put on them. As someone with ADHD, I can't think of anything I like less than painting. I don't like painting. I don't like waiting for paint to dry. I don't like any part of the process. But these shelves don't really look nice enough for me to stain, so I decided to go with a coat of white paint and then put some gray trim on the front to kind of match the motif of my van. I get this white paint from Habitat for Humanity. They only sell a few colors of paint. They sell it in bulk and they sell it really inexpensively. So if you just want one of the main primary colors, that is a great place to go for painting projects. In a bit of serendipity, I accidentally put my GoPro on time-lapse mode on this clip, and it worked out because this is how I wish painting were in real life. Also, I'm a very lazy person, and so if I have to paint something, what I like to do is, if at all possible, lift it up to a higher height. As you can see, I've done this, and I put it on a cart with wheels so that I can paint, rotate it around, and see how it looks. And by the way, this needs about 4 coats of white paint, and I put 2 on it. I'm not really happy with how the paint turned out, but it looks okay in the van, but in the lights, especially the harsh lights of the workshop, it doesn't look that good. This is what the cabinet looked like after the first coat of paint, and as I was filming this, I was trying to decide whether I wanted to wait and put a second coat of paint on it or just smash this monstrosity with a sledgehammer and start over. While the paint was drying on the cabinet, I decided this would be a good time to go ahead and paint the shelves. Again, I don't like painting. I find it very boring and tedious, but it's something that I wanted to do to try and make these look good when they were inside the van. Also, I have a bad habit of putting paint on too thin, so I really tried to put it on a little bit thicker to cover up some of the natural stain of the wood. The last part of the project involved painting these little hexagon shelves. I bought these off Amazon. I bought the absolute cheapest ones I could find. I found 7 of them packed together like Matryoshka dolls for $20. I think they're probably made of balsa wood. They're very, very thin and lightweight. I don't expect them to hold a lot of weight, and I don't expect them to hold up very long. I wanted to kind of come up with a color theme for the van. I don't want the entire thing to be white and gray, so I painted 2 of the hexagon shelves white, 2 of them black, and 3 of them red. Now, in my van right now is kind of a gray, white, and blue color scheme, but I'm gonna change that over to red. I want the whole thing to be red, white, and gray. I think that's kind of a cool look, and it kind of goes with the BigRobsVan logo that I came up with. So anyway, I had plenty of spray paint laying around, and so that's what I'm doing here. I spray painted again a couple of coats. I sprayed 1 coat, let it dry, and sprayed a second coat, and I'm gonna put these on the side of the shelf of the cabinet once I get it installed in the van. After the paint was dried, I attached some trim, slid it into the van, and here we are. For the side trim, I used 1x3s. Those were leftover slats from my bed project. And for the front of each shelf, I used 1x6s. That made a 4-inch lip, which I hope will keep things inside each shelf when I'm driving. The bottom shelf holds my laptop bag, my camera bag, and my 5-gallon bucket, which fortunately I have not had to use yet. The last step involved attaching those hexagon shelves to the side of the cabinet, and to do that I used industrial strength Velcro. I have a link down this in the notes. This Velcro is 2 inches wide, and once it sticks, it is stuck. It is strong enough. I believe it says it will hold up to 10 pounds. Each one of these shelves weighs about 0.6 ounces. And I'm not planning on putting heavy things on them, so I think these will hold up just fine. There was really no rhyme or reason. I didn't go into this with a plan of how to arrange them. Once I got in the van, I just kind of moved them around and then attached the Velcro, and that's where they ended up. These are not the items that will permanently be on these shelves, but I wanted to put some things on there just to get a feel of how they would look. There's no coincidence that there are so many Muppets here hanging out in the Happiness Hotel. So I like how they look. By the way, that is a piece of wasabi and some ginger. Well, that's it. Takeaways from this project. Number 1, I would have made it smaller. I would not have made it 24 inches deep. I really can't see past the corner of it from the front seat and the mirror looking back, so I should have made it more shallow. The other thing that I have learned in the past week is that this van desperately needs insulation. It needs the walls and the floor finished, so I have jumped the gun. I'm gonna have to pull this back out as I insulate and put some paneling on these walls. Also, I mean, I don't hate the color scheme, but it certainly doesn't pop. You know, the rest of this van is white and gray, and this is gray and white. So, oh, by the way, this piece of trim up here, I had just glued and it fell off, which is why there's a clamp holding it while the glue dries. So, I mean, overall, I don't hate it as much as I thought I was going to hate it. It does feel very large in here. I told my friend that it felt large in here, and he said, this van is 60 square feet. The back of this is 60 square feet. So in relation to the space, it is large. Again, the bottom that I put down here is enough for, it's the perfect size for my laptop bag, my camera bag, my CPAP bag. All that stuff will fit here. This middle one, I could put my plastic containers, and again, I have this lip on the front so they won't slide out while I'm driving. And this top one is great for temporary stuff like jackets and pillows. And not only is it open, I left the top of it open so there's no top, so I can toss stuff in from back here or get it from the front or get it from the driver's seat. But the sides are high enough where I don't think things will fall out over the side. So I really do like that design. If I were going to do this all over again, I would almost leave these sides open instead of leaving a spot for these shelves. I might just use a 2x2 and not put a piece of plywood on the side, and that way I could access everything from this area easily as well as from that side. I might just put a 1x6 and leave this open. So we're going to call this cabinet 1.0. It works for what it is, but there may be a cabinet 2.0 in my future at some point in time. But as I have learned very recently, there are other more pressing issues that I need to do on the van. So, hey, thanks for watching. If you've built a cabinet like this, send me a link to it. I'd love to see it. And I have another camping adventure coming up very, very soon that I think you'll enjoy. So stay tuned. If you haven't, please like this video. And if you like these videos and you like watching my videos, subscribe. Because I'm trying to get to 1 million subscribers, and so far I'm like 999,960 short, something like that. So anyway, thanks. I'll see you guys soon.